At the dinner, nobody comprehended the millionaire Japanese woman. Until the waitress spoke Japanese. Rain smeared the Manhattan skyline into streaks of neon and shadow, as if the city itself wanted to hide what was about to unfold. Inside the private dining room, time felt slower, the chandelier's glow muted, the mahogany walls pressing closer. A $500 million deal rested on the polished table, yet no one truly breathed. Hana Miyamoto, the Japanese millionaire at the center of it all, sat in absolute silence, her eyes unreadable, her presence unsettling. James Carver, sharp-suited and restless, leaned forward with a smirk that carried too much confidence. Ethan Holt swirled his wine lazily, convinced the night belonged to him. They whispered, they chuckled, they assumed. To them, Hana's silence was weakness, a barrier they could exploit. But her stillness was not emptiness. It was a mask sharpened by storms no one in the room could imagine. Lily Nakamura, the waitress carrying a tray no one cared to notice, felt the room's unease coil tighter with every minute. She moved like a shadow, invisible to men who believed they already won. Yet her ears caught what others dismissed. Hana's subtle Japanese words to her aide Kenji Sato, sharp and deliberate, responses that James and Ethan didn't understand. Lily's heart thudded as their arrogance grew, each careless laugh revealing a dangerous secret. The storm outside beat harder against the glass, mirroring the storm inside Hana's silence. Everyone thought they were in control until Hana's gaze flickered toward Lily, a glance so precise it felt like a signal. It was as if the millionaire and the unnoticed waitress shared a secret no one else in that room could fathom. What followed would tear through pride, expose deception, and twist every assumption into ruin. And the question burned, why was the silent woman smiling? Rain still lashed against the towering glass of Manhattan's skyline, washing the city in silver veins and fractured neon. The private dining room seemed carved out of another world, a chamber designed not just for eating but for power. Dark mahogany walls rose like solemn witnesses, their polished grain gleaming beneath the soft golden flicker of a crystal chandelier suspended like frozen fire above the table. The chandelier's cut glass fractured the light into shards that skated across polished silverware and wine glasses, giving the entire scene a haunted brilliance. Outside, blurred lights from traffic below flickered through a vast window that stretched across the far wall, turning the storm into a living backdrop. Inside, silence reigned for a moment, heavy as a judge's gavel. At the head of the table sat Hana Miyamoto, poised like a figure in a portrait, her posture serene yet unyielding. Every detail about her presence was deliberate, the dark silk of her dress, the straight fall of her hair framing a face sculpted in quiet determination, the stillness in her hands resting gently upon the closed folder that carried a deal worth $500 million. She exuded the kind of authority that didn't need to be declared. It pulsed from her, steady and controlled. For Hana, silence was not an absence of voice but a language in itself. Behind her chair stood Kenji Sato, her trusted aide, tall, composed, his features disciplined. He carried himself with the subtle dignity of a man accustomed to holding secrets without ever letting them leak. His task was simple yet vital: to translate, to shield, to interpret not just words but intention. When Hana inclined her head slightly, Kenji leaned forward, his voice low yet firm, echoing her Japanese with the clarity of a seasoned diplomat. Across from them, James Carver, the CEO who believed every room bent toward his gravity, leaned forward with a gleam in his eyes. His suit was tailored with ruthless precision, his cufflinks gleaming like trophies, his smile polished to disguise the impatience in his jaw. He looked at Hana as one might study a puzzle piece, something to be solved, perhaps even dismissed if it didn't fit his grand design. Ethan Holt, his vice president, sat beside him with the easy arrogance of a man who had never known true defeat. He swirled his wine lazily, letting the ruby liquid catch the fractured chandelier light, his smirk faint but lingering, as if victory was already assured. Together they formed a wall of self-assurance, convinced that money, language, and presence were all that mattered, blind to the currents that twisted unseen beneath the surface. James finally broke the silence. "Shall we begin?" His words were clipped, his smile broadening as if to underscore his control. Kenji translated for Hana, who responded softly in Japanese, her voice calm, deliberate, almost melodic. Kenji repeated her words in English. "Miyamoto thanks you for the invitation and acknowledges the importance of this discussion." James nodded, though the crease between his brows betrayed irritation. "I see. Well, time is valuable, and ours tonight is worth a fortune. Let us cut directly to the matter." His tone carried a hint of condescension, one that Ethan caught instantly. The vice president leaned in, whispering just loud enough for Kenji to catch. but pretending Hana could not. It would help if she spoke English, wouldn't it? Kenji's expression remained stoic, but Hana's dark eyes flickered, a spark of knowing passing through them before she turned back to her aide and delivered another response in Japanese. Kenji, with a steady voice, translated, "Miyamoto prefers precision over haste, and in her language she achieves that clarity." Ethan chuckled under his breath, swirling his wine once more. "Precision," he muttered. "Or maybe just an excuse," James smirked. The two of them feeding off each other's confidence, blind to the weight that Hana's silence carried. In the corner of the room, almost invisible, Lily Nakamura moved with quiet grace, pouring water into crystal glasses and adjusting plates with careful precision. Her black uniform blended into the shadows of the room, her steps so light they barely made the air stir. Yet her eyes, sharp and attentive, absorbed every flicker of expression, every tonal shift, every glance exchanged between the powerful figures at the table. To the men she was background, a servant fulfilling a function. To Hana, though, her presence was noted, if only in the subtle way Hana's gaze occasionally flicked in her direction. Lily's story was far from the fine dining floor. A fine arts student in New York, she carried within her the rhythms of Kyoto, the cadences of a childhood spent learning a language that now linked her silently to the woman at the head of the table. Fluent in Japanese, though none here knew it, she recognized the subtleties in Hana's words, the cadence that hinted not at weakness, but at restraint, calculation, awareness. James leaned forward, his tone sharper now. "Miss Miyamoto, this proposal offers you immediate expansion into the U.S. market with protections for your assets. Surely you can appreciate the advantage?" Hana answered softly, her Japanese fluid and measured, her eyes locked on James as though testing him. Kenji translated calmly, "Miss Miyamoto wishes to review the finer details before making any commitment." Ethan sighed dramatically, resting his chin on his hand. "This is going to be a long night," he said, his voice carrying enough disdain to be heard by all. "We don't have time for drawn-out ceremonies." Kenji's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but Hana's expression remained unchanged. The silence she held was not the silence of someone struggling. It was the silence of someone watching, waiting, and learning. Lily, standing behind James's chair as she refilled his water, caught the faint curve of Hana's lips, so subtle it might have been missed. It wasn't a smile of courtesy. It was something deeper, something Lily couldn't yet name. The rain outside hammered harder, wind rattling against the glass, thunder rolling distantly like a warning drum. The chandelier swayed almost imperceptibly, its crystals chiming a soft, uneasy note. The dining room, for all its grandeur, felt smaller now, the weight of arrogance pushing against the walls. James tapped the folder on the table, his voice a touch more commanding. "Let us be clear, we've come with generosity, but we will not linger. Deals of this magnitude require decisiveness." "Does she understand that?" Kenji translated, and Hana answered with calm precision, her words unhurried. Lily listened carefully, her heart quickening as she recognized the quiet steel in Hana's reply. Though James and Ethan remained oblivious, the waitress knew what Hana truly conveyed. "I understand everything, more than you realize." James leaned back, exchanging a smug glance with Ethan. "Well, let's hope her translator isn't softening the truth," he muttered. Ethan laughed quietly, raising his glass in mock salute. The arrogance thickened, spreading like smoke through the room. Lily's chest tightened as she placed another dish on the table, her mind replaying the Japanese phrases Hana had used, phrases full of layered meaning that Kenji rendered into polished diplomacy. The executives thought they were hearing the whole story, but they were only receiving the edge. Lily realized then that the silence wasn't empty. It was alive, carrying a secret weight the men in suits couldn't grasp. The night pressed on, the rain steady, the air dense with tension. Every sound, the scrape of a fork, the faint pop of a cork, the whisper of silk as Hana shifted slightly in her chair, echoed louder than it should have. And as Lily moved between shadows, watching the arrogance grow unchecked, she felt a pull inside her, a sense that this dinner was not just about money or contracts, but about something far more fragile: respect, dignity, and the hidden strength of a woman everyone underestimated. The storm outside grew heavier, its rhythm drumming against the vast pane of glass as if the entire city were leaning into the night. Manhattan's skyline blurred further, lights smeared into trembling streaks of gold and red. The private dining room, despite its grandeur, began to feel smaller, almost suffocating under the chandelier's flickering glow. Every flicker of crystal reflected shards of arrogance from James Carver and Ethan Holt, whose voices filled the room with a volume that betrayed both impatience and unchecked superiority. They spoke louder now, their tones sharpened, their laughter careless, convinced their guest neither understood nor belonged. James leaned back, his chair creaking faintly on the thick carpet. He tapped the edge of the folder with an air of triumph. "Ethan," he said in a voice just above conversational but loud enough to dominate, "you'd think someone handling $500 million could manage English. What's the point of building empires if you can't even negotiate without a babysitter?" His smile widened, proud of his cruelty, his eyes glinting toward Kenji as though the aide were nothing more than a translator in the way of progress. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head as though baffled by the situation. He lifted his glass, the ruby wine catching the fractured light of the chandelier, and said with casual disdain, "It's almost amusing. She sits there, silent, mysterious, letting someone else speak for her. People like that are easy to bend. Silence always hides weakness. Haven't you noticed?" Lily, balancing a tray of porcelain plates near the corner, froze for a fraction of a second. Her hands moved with practiced grace, but her ears locked onto every word. She glanced toward Hana, who remained composed, her expression carved from still water. Yet when Hana spoke, the softness of her Japanese cut through the arrogance like steel beneath silk. Her voice carried nuance, sharp edges, layered meanings that only someone fluent could catch. Kenji translated with even, respectful tones. "Miss Miyamoto appreciates your concern for efficiency. She requests clarification on Clause 16 regarding intellectual property rights." The words, though polite, were a faint echo of what Hana had truly said. Lily had caught the original, "Your arrogance is transparent. I will not allow my work to be stolen by men who believe my silence is ignorance." The contrast made Lily's pulse quicken. She placed a plate gently before Ethan, who didn't even glance up at her, too busy smirking at James. "Clause 16, Ethan repeated, leaning closer to James with a grin. "She probably doesn't even know what's in it. I doubt she's read the thing. Why would she? She's got her assistant for that." His voice carried the sting of superiority, spoken loud enough that the mockery couldn't be mistaken for anything else. Rain beat harder on the glass, the storm echoing the pulse now rising in Lily's chest. She moved to refill water, her eyes flicking briefly toward Hana, whose gaze was steady, unwavering as if she heard every insult yet chose not to dignify it with a reaction. Her reply in Japanese was clipped, deliberate, a blade hidden in velvet. Lily caught the words instantly, "Fool's mistake, quiet for ignorance. Their downfall is already seated." Kenji, as ever, softened the phrasing into diplomatic neutrality. Miyamoto suggests additional revisions to ensure both parties' mutual respect. James gave a thin laugh, one without humor. "Respect," she says. "Mutual? Interesting word choice." His voice rose again, carrying the condescension like perfume through the room. "Tell her this is not Japan. In New York, we do things directly, efficiently, without all this ceremonial waiting. She needs to understand who holds the cards." Hana responded again, her Japanese firm, precise, like the cut of a calligrapher's brush. Lily's breath caught when she translated the meaning silently in her own mind. "The man who claims to hold the cards often forgets who owns the table." Kenji related more gently, "Miss Miyamoto respects your time and will consider your emphasis on efficiency." Ethan rolled his eyes dramatically, sighing as if bored. "You see what I mean, James? This is theater. She wants to drag this out. Let us chase her approval. But she doesn't realize we could walk away and find someone else tomorrow. She's not the only option." Lily's grip on the pitcher tightened. The arrogance was suffocating, the dismissal painful to hear. Yet Hana sat untouched, her silence deeper, her control more absolute. It was a silence that forced the room to reveal itself, one arrogance at a time. Lily's heart thumped as she realized the executives didn't see what she did. They believed they were carving Hana down, but in truth she was measuring them, filing away every careless insult, every whispered betrayal. The storm outside rumbled like distant drum. Lightning flared for an instant, painting the room in stark white before retreating into shadow. The air felt thicker, heavier, as though the city itself leaned against the glass, waiting. Lily set the pitcher down carefully, her knuckles pale, her chest rising with shallow breath. She had grown up learning that silence in Japanese culture was not void but strength, a deliberate tool to command space and reveal character. What James and Ethan mocked, she understood. They had no idea Hana's restraint was as sharp as a blade hidden in plain sight. James leaned closer to Ethan, dropping his voice but not enough to hide the words. "This will be easier than I thought. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. She can't even defend herself without her aid." Lily's stomach twisted. She wanted to shout, to cut through their smugness with the truth she knew. But her place was bound by the uniform she wore. Her role was to serve, to be unseen. Yet her ears burned with Hana's sharp responses, unacknowledged, untransmitted. Arrogance blinds them. Let them believe what they wish. Their ignorance is my strength. That was the truth of Hana's words, but the executives never heard it. The chandelier swayed lightly, its crystals clinking together like a warning bell. The storm's reflection danced across Hana's face, casting fleeting shadows that made her appear carved of both light and stone. Lily's breath caught again as Hana's gaze lifted suddenly, piercing across the table, sliding past James and Ethan, landing squarely on her. It was a gaze that froze her mid-step, that stripped away the invisibility of her uniform, and pinned her with startling clarity. It was not a plea for help, nor a command, but a recognition, as if Hana saw her, truly saw her, and knew that Lily understood what no one else in the room did. Lily's chest tightened, her thoughts colliding. Should she remain silent, continuing the role of the unnoticed servant, or should she step into the storm building within the room, risk everything by speaking the truth she heard? Her mind spun with the weight of it, with the consequences that loomed. And yet, as Hana's unwavering gaze held hers, Lily felt a question rise within her own soul, one she couldn't ignore. Have you ever overlooked someone who was quietly brilliant, only to realize too late the power they carried? The question echoed like thunder in her mind, and she wondered if she herself could resist being overlooked much longer. The rain hammered harder, the city blurred deeper into shadow, and in the heavy silence that followed, Lily's heart beat in time with Hana's piercing, knowing eye. The rain had grown into a steady roar, hammering against the glass as though the storm itself wanted entry into the private dining room. Lightning flared beyond the skyline, illuminating the blurred lights of Manhattan before vanishing into darkness again. Inside, the chandelier's glow felt dimmer, as if the storm outside was leeching the light away. Tension hung in the room heavier than the velvet curtains drawn against the walls, and every movement carried the weight of something unsaid. James leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to suggest secrecy, though the arrogance of his tone betrayed him. He tilted the contract toward Ethan, his finger running along the fine print. "We'll shave down the incentives by 15%, he murmured. Confident Hana couldn't follow. She'll never notice. Clause 18 can carry the adjustment, disguised as operational costs. By the time her team back in Tokyo reviews it, the signatures will already be inked." Ethan smirked, swirling the last of his wine before setting the glass down with a sharp clink. "You're right. And cut the equity share by 2%. It'll look minor on paper, but with projections, that's millions funneled back to us. She won't understand a word we say tonight, and her aide will spin it as a harmless detail." He laughed under his breath, certain the room belonged to him. Lily's steps faltered as she approached with the water pitcher, her heart tightening. She had heard every syllable, clear as thunder. Her hands trembled faintly, and she steadied the pitcher with deliberate control, forcing her breathing to match the rhythm of the storm outside. She glanced at Hana, expecting perhaps confusion or oblivion, but instead found eyes sharp as glass, gaze fixed upon the men as though dissecting them piece by piece. Hana spoke then, her voice in Japanese calm but edged, carrying a tone that sliced beneath the surface. Lily caught every word. "Wolves believe themselves clever when they circle, but the lamb they mock is holding a blade." Kenji translated smoothly, softening the edge into neutrality. "Miss Miyamoto requests clarification on projected equity shares for the U.S. market." James smiled tightly, not recognizing the warning layered in Hana's Japanese. He tapped the contract with a flourish. "Of course, all transparent, all for her benefit. Tell her efficiency means compromise." Hana responded again, her words laced with meaning. "Compromise forged in deceit is wrought beneath polished wood." Kenji repeated with composure. "She acknowledges compromise, provided it remains balanced and honorable." Ethan leaned back, stretching as though bored, his arrogance thickening with each breath. "Balanced, honor, that's a cultural indulgence. Here it's profit, plain and simple. If she can't adapt, she doesn't belong in this market." Lily felt her chest tighten, the air in the room growing thinner with every exchange. The storm outside rattled the windows violently, echoing the storm building in her conscience. She wanted to remain invisible, just a waitress gliding between table and kitchen, but the weight of truth pressed harder against her ribs. Her childhood in Kyoto returned to her, the lessons of silence, of patience, of respect, but also the lessons of courage. To speak when silence would mean betrayal. Hana's gaze flicked toward her again, sharp and knowing, as if silently asking whether she would stand idle, while deceit unfolded. Lily's hands gripped the pitcher so tightly her knuckles whitened, the water trembling against crystal rims. As she steadied her movements, She placed it carefully before James, who didn't notice her at all. Her heart raced, her palms damp, but her resolve began to solidify. She caught Hana's next Japanese remark, one delivered with composure, yet carrying unmistakable fire. They think silence hides ignorance. Let them choke on their own pride. Kenji translated with restraint. Miss Miyamoto will carefully consider your point. James smirked, leaning back in triumph. See, progress, he whispered again to Ethan, his voice now an echo of greed. By the time she signs, we'll have stripped her clean. She'll think she's secured her empire when we've already eaten into it. The words burned through Lily like acid. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning the storm for a moment. She couldn't stand still anymore, not when truth lay strangled beneath false smiles and polished lies. Her thoughts swirled with fear. She was just a waitress, an outsider, a student working shifts to pay tuition. Speaking up could cost her job, her reputation, her future. Yet silence felt heavier than all those risks combined. When did you last take a risk to protect someone's truth? The question pressed against her conscience, a whisper from somewhere deep within her chest. It was the kind of question that separates comfort from courage, invisibility from impact. She realized then she couldn't remain invisible any longer. She adjusted the picture slowly, using the motion to disguise the tremor in her hand, her eyes never leaving Hana. Hana met her gaze unflinching, as though already aware of the decision forming in Lily's heart. The storm rumbled louder, as if echoing her resolve, as though the city itself demanded witness to what would come next. Ethan leaned across the table, his voice dripping with mockery. Tell her we've been generous. Tell her that compromise is the cost of entry. She doesn't get to dictate terms here. Hana's reply, though spoken softly in Japanese, rang in Lily's ears like thunder. Only a fool believes generosity is theft dressed in. Kenji repeated diplomatically. Miss Miyamoto values your generosity, but insists on fairness. The chandelier flickered overhead, shadows stretching long across the table, casting the executives' faces into sharper relief. Lily's breath grew shallow, her heart pounding fast. Every instinct screamed to remain silent, but the truth burned too fiercely inside her to ignore. Her entire body trembled with the weight of choice. Yet her spirit had already stepped forward. She steadied herself by placing the pitcher carefully on the side table, her fingers lingering for an extra moment, drawing in strength. The storm's reflection shimmered against the glass, lightning splitting the sky. She thought of her professors in Kyoto, of quiet afternoons sketching temples, of the lessons carved into her by language and culture, that silence could be noble, but sometimes silence was betrayal. She inhaled slowly, the decision cementing in her chest. She would not remain a shadow in a room where truth was strangled. Hana's eyes, piercing and unwavering, locked with hers again, and in that instant, Lily understood. This was not just a dinner, not just a deal. This was a crucible of integrity, and she had been placed here not by accident, but by fate. Her lips pressed together, her mind clear. The time to act was drawing near. The storm outside crashed like cymbals, a furious symphony pounding against the glass. While inside the room, the weight of arrogance thickened like smoke, and in the center of it, a waitress steadied her breath, steadied her hands, and prepared to ignite the spark that would unravel everything. The storm softened for a moment, its rhythm shifting from violent drumming to a steady patter, the sound like thousands of whispered secrets brushing against the glass. The chandelier above flickered once, its crystal edges catching the dim light before settling again. As though the room itself braced for something irreversible, the mahogany walls seemed closer, the air denser, and the tension that had been simmering all night, now pressed down like the weight of stone. James Carver leaned back with smug satisfaction, convinced he had the room in his grasp. Ethan Holt chuckled beside him, his arrogance spilling unchecked. They spoke in low tones but with deliberate clarity, not caring who overheard, certain their guest remained blind to their manipulation. Their words dripped with greed, every phrase carefully crafted to strip value, to disguise betrayal as generosity. Lily Nakamura's heart hammered against her ribs, her hands clenched at her sides. She had spent the night absorbing every sharp remark, every subtle dismissal, every lie woven into the polished fabric of business. She had listened to Hana's precise Japanese responses that revealed her full awareness, yet had been softened into neutrality by Kenji for diplomacy's sake. Now the deceit had gone too far, and silence had become unbearable. Hana's eyes, calm yet piercing, shifted toward her once more. That single glance was not a command, nor a plea but recognition. an acknowledgement of the truth Lily carried within her. The weight of it anchored her feet to the floor, yet it also lifted her spirit, drawing courage from a place she didn't know she possessed. She inhaled, steadying her breath, then stepped forward. The movement was small, but in the silence of the room it resounded louder than thunder. James turned his head, irritation flashing across his face, as though annoyed the furniture itself dared interrupt. Ethan raised an eyebrow, his smirk half-formed, already preparing some dismissive remark. Before they could speak, Lily placed the tray she held carefully on the sideboard, straightened her posture, and bowed deedily toward Hana Miyamoto, her movements fluid and deliberate, reflecting the traditions of her Kyoto childhood. When she rose, her voice broke the silence with flawless Japanese, clear and resonant, carrying the weight of truth. "Forgive my intrusion, Miyamoto-sama," she said, her tone respectful yet firm, "but I can no longer remain silent while deceit is spoken so openly. These men believe your silence makes you blind. They plot to cut incentives, to strip equity, to twist this agreement into a trap." The words struck the room like a lightning bolt. Hana's eyes widened, not in surprise at Lily's knowledge but in recognition of the courage it took to speak them aloud. Kenji's composure faltered for the first time that evening, his lips parting in astonishment before he quickly masked it again. James straightened, his chair scraping harshly against the carpet. "What is this?" he barked, his voice sharp with disbelief. His arrogance cracked into fury. "Who the hell does she think she is?" Ethan's smirk evaporated, his glass frozen halfway to his lip. He set it down hard enough that the stemware rang, his expression stunned, as though the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. But Lily did not waver. Her hands were steady, her voice unwavering as she continued in Japanese. Her eyes locked on Hana's. "They mock your dignity. They call your culture ceremony, your silence weakness. They believe you are unaware, yet every word you have spoken has been precise, every response sharper than they imagine. You deserve to know the truth of what they plot, and I cannot allow them to hide it any longer." The storm outside responded with a roll of thunder, distant yet commanding, as though the city itself bore witness to her defiance. Hana's composure trembled, her lips parting as emotion welled in her dark eyes. For hours she had endured the arrogance, every insult disguised as civility, her silence weaponized against her. To hear her truth spoken aloud by an unexpected ally broke through the fortress she had built. A shimmer of tears blurred her vision, a relief so profound it slipped past the discipline she always maintained. She blinked quickly, but the sheen of moisture remained, reflecting the chandelier's glow like diamonds on her lashes. Kenji's chest rose sharply as though he wanted to intervene, but he stayed still, recognizing the sacred weight of the moment. Hana lifted her hand slightly, granting Lily permission to continue. Lily bowed once more, the motion both formal and deeply personal. "I apologize for stepping beyond my role, but silence in the face of dishonor would make me complicit. I was taught that respect means defending truth, even when the cost is fear." She paused, her voice softening with sincerity. "Who's been the surprise hero in your life? Sometimes it is the one you least expect, the one standing quietly in the corner, until the moment comes when silence is no longer an option." The question seemed to hang in the air, not just for Hana but for everyone who would hear this story. It reached beyond the mahogany walls, beyond the storm-lashed glass, into the hearts of anyone who had ever underestimated an ally hidden in plain sight. James slammed his hand on the table, his face red, his composure shredded. "This is outrageous. She's just a waitress. She has no place here." His voice cracked with desperation rather than authority. Ethan leaned forward, anger flickering in his eyes, but beneath it lay a tremor of unease. The foundation of their arrogance had been fractured, and the truth they thought buried had been dragged into the light by someone they hadn't even seen. Hana inhaled slowly, the tears in her eyes steadying into strength. She turned her gaze to Lily, her lips trembling before curving into a faint, genuine smile, one born not of politeness but of gratitude. Her words, when they came, were soft but resonant, spoken in Japanese for Lily alone. "You have given me back my voice tonight. For that I will never forget you." Lily lowered her head, her chest tight with both fear and relief, knowing there was no turning back. The storm outside had shifted again, rain softening into a gentler rhythm, as though the sky itself acknowledged the turning point within these walls. The chandelier flickered once more, its crystals chiming lightly, fragile yet clear, echoing the fragile clarity now piercing the room. For the first time all evening, James and Ethan sat in silence, their arrogance stripped bare, their smugness replaced by the power they thought absolute had been pierced by a single voice, one they had dismissed as irrelevant. And at the head of the table, Hana Miyamoto, the woman they had underestimated, allowed herself a single tear to fall, not of weakness, but of relief. Relief that truth had finally stepped forward, carried by an ally no one expected, relief that her silence had not left her abandoned. The night had shifted irrevocably. The storm outside softened, but within the dining room, the true storm had just begun. The chandelier trembled faintly above the table, crystals clinking in delicate notes, the sound barely audible beneath the softened patter of rain. The storm had calmed outside, but within the mahogany-walled chamber, tension only thickened. James Carver's face burned crimson, veins visible along his temple, as he fought to reclaim authority. Ethan Holt sat rigid, his smirk gone, replaced by the first hints of dread, the glass before him untouched, the wine surface trembling faintly with the vibration of his restless fingers. Hana Minamoto sat motionless, her presence amplified by stillness, her dark eyes glistening under the chandelier's flicker. The single tear that had slipped moments earlier was gone, leaving behind only quiet strength. Her hands, steady and deliberate, folded before her on the table. The silence stretched long, heavy, suffocating. James leaned forward, desperate to break it. "This is absurd," he snapped, his voice louder than intended. "A waitress spins stories in Japanese, and suddenly we're expected to believe them? This dinner is business, not theater." His words rattled against the room, brittle and unconvincing. Hannah's gaze shifted toward Lily, unspoken trust radiating from her eyes. Slowly, with composure etched into every motion, Hannah began to speak. Her Japanese unfurled in measured cadence. Each word weighted, deliberate, carrying more than meaning. It carried history. The rhythm of her voice was steady, yet beneath it lay echoes of pain long endured. Lily listened intently, her heart pounding. She bowed slightly before lifting her voice in translation, her English crisp and unwavering. "Miyamoto-sama wishes to share the truth that has remained unseen. Years ago, a car accident altered her life. The trauma did not weaken her intellect, but left her with expressive aphasia. When stress surrounds her, her English locks away as though trapped behind glass. Her thoughts remain sharp, but the words in another tongue slip beyond reach. The words struck the table like thunder. Ethan's mouth parted slightly, his composure faltering. James stiffened, though his jaw clenched as if refusing to absorb the meaning. Hannah continued in Japanese, her voice unwavering now, steady with conviction. Lily's translation carried her truth like a blade slicing the fabric of false assumption. She mastered English in her youth, studied abroad and negotiated across continents. But the accident changed everything. Doctors told her she might never speak fluently again under pressure. Yet she refused to surrender. She rebuilt her empire not through deception, but through sheer will. Every silence you mock tonight is not emptiness. It is resilience. The chandelier swayed faintly, its fractured light falling across Hana's face, highlighting the steel in her eyes. Her voice grew sharper in Japanese, Lily capturing each nuance. "You believed her silence meant ignorance. You believed her dependence on Kenji meant weakness. Yet every figure in this contract, every clause, every hidden trap, you thought she missed them. She saw them all." James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hand twitching toward the contract before retreating. "This is a convenient story," he muttered, his bravado cracking. Ethan cleared his throat, his voice uncertain. "A condition, aphasia, you said? That doesn't mean she understands everything." "Perhaps. Perhaps the details." His attempt at justification faltered under Hana's unrelenting gaze. Hana spoke again, her Japanese carrying the steady cadence of a verdict. Lily translated, her tone cutting through their panic. "Do not confuse silence with blindness. Do not confuse restraint with ignorance. She has lived years with words stolen from her, but her vision remains untouched. You underestimated her, not because she was silent but because you could not see beyond your arrogance." The storm outside growled faintly, thunder rolling across the skyline, as if the city itself answered the revelation. Kenji stepped forward at last, his composure firm but his eyes blazing. "You mocked what you did not understand," he said in English, his voice low but resonant. "Her silence is not weakness. It is discipline. Every decision she makes is intentional. Every pause is measured. Tonight she let you reveal yourselves." James slammed his fist onto the table, silverware rattling violently. "This is nonsense. You expect us to believe she's been sitting here, understanding everything, while we wasted time." His voice cracked, desperation seeping into the edges. Lily met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, she understood every insult, every deceit, and she allowed you to show the truth of who you are." Ethan leaned forward, his forehead damp with sweat now, his hands clasped as though searching for composure. This is a misunderstanding," Perhaps we overstated. His voice trailed off, hollow. Hana's response in Japanese cut clean through his stammer. Lily translated, with unwavering clarity. A misunderstanding is accidental. Your scheme was deliberate. Do not cloak malice in softer words. The chandelier flickered again, shadows sliding across the wall. The mahogany seemed darker, the orchids on the table drooping slightly in the humid air. Every detail of the room pressed inward, heightening the claustrophobia of the moment. James swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance fractured into silence. He darted a glance at Ethan, but no words came. Ethan's lips pressed together, his jaw twitching. The confidence that once dripped from him now drained dry. Lily's own chest rose and fell quickly, the weight of Hana's story echoing within her. The courage it took to endure years of misunderstanding, the strength it took to rebuild an empire. Under the shadow of stolen words, it resonated like fire in her bones. Hana spoke again, her Japanese softer now, tinged with raw vulnerability. Lily's voice carried it faithfully into English. Do you know what it is to have your voice locked away? To think in sentences but speak in fragments? To know every number, every plan yet be met with laughter because silence shields your truth? I have lived that burden, and yet I rise not in spite of it, but because of it. Her eyes glistened once more but her spine remained straight, her presence unshaken. James and Ethan sat as though shackled, their arrogance collapsing under the weight of revelation. The storm outside swelled again, rain lashing against the glass, lightning illuminating the room in harsh white light before fading into shadow. The chandelier chimed faintly, like the echo of a verdict delivered. For the first time all evening, silence returned to the room. True silence, not the silence of dismissal, but of recognition, of truths too heavy to deny. Hana Miyamoto had revealed her story, and in its light, every mockery, every deception, every scheme laid bare on the table now reeked of rot. The executives' panic deepened, their empire of arrogance crumbling piece by piece, undone by the very silence they once ridiculed. The storm outside thickened again, the rain surging against the glass like a relentless tide, streaks of water twisting the skyline into trembling ribbons of light. Thunder rolled, low and steady, a warning drumbeat beneath the uneasy quiet that had descended over the table. James Carver leaned forward, his earlier rage hidden now behind a mask of carefully arranged sympathy. His voice softened, but the edges of calculation remained sharp. Miss Miyamoto, he began, gesturing with open palms as though suddenly benevolent, we've clearly had some misunderstandings tonight. Tensions run high when numbers this large are involved. Perhaps what we need is a simpler approach, one less burdened by complications. A streamlined agreement, for your sake, and ours. Ethan Holt quickly echoed the performance, his smile tight, his words coated in false warmth. Yes, too much detail invites confusion. What if we revise the terms into something more direct? A partnership without unnecessary complexities. Efficiency, clarity, that's what we all want, isn't it? His fingers drummed lightly against the table, betraying nerves even as he tried to project composure. Lily Nakamura stood near the sideboard, her pulse quickening as their tone shifted. She had seen predators dress themselves in gentleness before, and she recognized the same performance now. She caught Hana's gaze, steady and unshaken, and understood without words that the executive's new mask was only another layer of deceit. Kenji Sato translated their offer into Japanese with impeccable neutrality, but Hana did not answer immediately. Instead, she motioned toward the folder. Kenji placed it before her, opening it to reveal the dense contract, pages crisp beneath the chandelier's fractured light. Hana glanced once at Lily, her eyes deliberate. It was a signal, subtle but clear. Lily stepped closer, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the contract. She was no lawyer, no executive, but her nights of study had sharpened her eyes for detail, and her fluency in both languages gave her an advantage the men never considered. She scanned the pages quickly, her eyes darting across lines of fine print. At first the text seemed innocuous, carefully polished with diplomatic phrasing. Then her breath caught, buried beneath layers of jargon, hidden within footnotes and subclauses, were traps, operational oversight clauses that demanded direct control of efficiency adjustments that stripped equity, streamlined protections that transferred intellectual property quietly into foreign hands. Every word was written to appear harmless, but beneath the surface, it was theft, polished into legality. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the paper. She lifted her head, meeting Hana's eyes, then spoke softly in Japanese. These clauses are poison. They disguise a complete surrender of your rights. They built their generosity on deceit. Kenji's face hardened as he glanced at the lines Lily indicated. Hana's expression remained calm, her hands folded neatly before her, but her gaze carried the sharpness of steel. She spoke in Japanese, her words precise, deliberate. Lily translated them into English, her voice clear and unwavering. Miss Miyamoto appreciates your concern for clarity. She requests, however, that you explain why Clause 22 grants your firm exclusive ownership of patents developed under this partnership. James blinked, caught off guard before quickly leaning forward with a smile that strained at the corners. A standard provision, he said smoothly. Protection for both parties. Nothing unusual. Hana spoke again, her tone unflinching. Lily translated, her words cutting through the room. Standard protections do not require surrender of intellectual property. You wrote this clause not to protect, but to steal. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading faintly at his temple. He leaned in quickly, trying to recover. Perhaps that wording is stronger than intended. We can adjust it. It's just language. Nothing binding if we remove it. His words tumbled faster, the confidence draining from his cadence. Hana's reply came sharp, immediate. Lily's translation carried it like a blade. And why would language like this appear at all if not by intention? The chandelier flickered above them, shadows rippling across the polished mahogany, making the room feel even smaller. The storm outside pounded harder, lightning flashing briefly, illuminating the executives' faces. James pale beneath his anger, Ethan restless beneath his forced smile. James's voice rose again, his false kindness fraying. Business is negotiation. Miss Miyamoto, every contract begins with ambition. Surely you understand. We aim high, you push back, and somewhere in the middle, we find agreement. Hana's Japanese was softer this time, but her words carried a cold precision that made Lily shiver as she translated. Ambition is not deceit. Negotiation is not theft. To call this standard is to insult the very concept of partnership. The silence that followed was brutal. Rain hammered against the window, thunder echoed across the sky, and in the heavy air of the dining room, James and Ethan sat like men cornered, scrambling for ground. Ethan forced a laugh, brittle and hollow. We may have been too aggressive, I admit, but we're here to build something beneficial. Surely one or two clauses won't destroy that. Let us move past details and look at the bigger picture. Expansion, opportunity, profit for all. Lily's eyes dropped back to the page, scanning deeper. Another trap glared at her. Her chest tightened as she lifted her head, her voice steady but sharp. Clause 34, an oversight board appointed solely by your firm, granting veto over operational strategy. That is not partnership. It is takeover. Kenji's jaw tightened visibly. Hana inclined her head slightly, giving Lily space to continue. Lily's translation of Hana's words was unrelenting. You cloak conquest in the language of cooperation. You mistake politeness for permission. But every lie is visible. James's mask shattered. He slammed the folder shut, his hand trembling slightly. Enough games. You think you've trapped us with semantics. This is how real business is done. If you can't stomach it, maybe you don't belong at this table. The words rang harshly, echoing in the confined space. But Hana did not flinch. Her calm was impenetrable, her silence louder than his rage. She waited, letting the storm outside fill the gap, letting the thunder punctuate the arrogance. When she finally spoke again in Japanese, her tone was measured, regal, and undeniable. Lily translated slowly, her voice carrying the weight of judgment. The table does not belong to you, Mr. Carver. Power is not taken by deceit. It is revealed by truth. Tonight you revealed yours, and it is smaller than you imagine. James froze, his jaw locked, his hands pressing hard against the closed folder as if he could crush its contents. Ethan shifted in his seat, glancing nervously toward the window as the rain lashed harder, as if the city itself condemned them. The chandelier swayed faintly once more, crystals chiming in delicate warning. The orchids on the table trembled in the draught. And within that grand room, the executives who had walked in with arrogance now sat shackled by their own schemes, control slipping away grain by grain, stripped not by force, but by the calm authority of a woman they thought powerless, and the voice of a waitress they had dismissed as invisible. The rain pounded harder against the glass, streaking the Manhattan skyline into trembling lines of neon and shadow. Thunder groaned across the city, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the mahogany walls. Inside the dining room, the air felt heavy, every flicker of the chandelier's fractured light sharpening the tension. James Carver sat rigid, jaw clenched, hands gripping the closed contract as if holding it tightly could preserve control. Ethan Holt shifted restlessly, sweat glistening at his temple, his earlier bravado drained into unease. Across the table, Hana Minamoto remained perfectly composed, her silence pressing against them with unrelenting weight. Then Kenji Sato stepped forward. His face was calm, but his movements carried an unmistakable finality. He reached into his jacket and placed a slim digital recorder on the polished table, its metallic frame catching the chandelier's glow. For a moment, neither James nor Ethan reacted, too wrapped in the fragile illusion that they still controlled the room. Kenji pressed play. The device crackled softly before releasing voices into the air. James's voice first, smug and sharp. "We'll shave down the incentives by 15%. She'll never notice. Clause 18 can carry the adjustment, disguised as operational costs." Ethan's laugh followed, cruel and careless. "Cut the equity share by 2% too. Millions funneled back to us. She won't understand a word we say tonight." The words filled the chamber like smoke, choking the silence, echoing against mahogany walls and polished silver. The chandelier flickered, the crystals trembling as if recoiling from the sound. James lurched forward, his hands striking the table. This is illegal," he shouted, voice cracking. "You can't record without consent. This means nothing." Kenji's expression did not change. "In this city," he said quietly, "consent is not required when one party is present. I was present." His words landed with a weight of truth, unshakable and precise. Ethan's face paled, his fingers clenching the arms of his chair. "It was a strategy," he sputtered, desperation creeping into his tone. "Just negotiation talk, nothing binding. You can't." The recording cut him off as his own voice spilled back into the room. "She can't even defend herself without her aid. By the time she signs, we'll have stripped her clean." The echo of his arrogance rang like a gavel. Lily Nakamura stood near the edge of the table, her chest rising fast, her heart pounding. She had known the truth, but to hear it spill into the room, undeniable and raw, made her breath catch. She glanced at Hana, whose eyes shimmered in the dim light, not with weakness, but with quiet triumph. Hana lifted her chin slightly, her hands resting with serene authority on the table's surface. She spoke in Japanese, her voice steady, and Lily translated, her tone sharp as glass. "You believed you could mock her silence. You believed deceit would remain hidden. Now your own words reveal you. There is no misunderstanding, no excuse, only truth." James shook his head violently, his voice rising into panic. "You can't do this. We came here in good faith." But the sound of the rain drowned him, the storm outside pressing louder against the glass, thunder rolling like judgment across the skyline. Hannah's gaze shifted slowly from James to Ethan, her eyes piercing, unwavering. She had endured hours of arrogance, endured years of misjudgment, and now the balance had turned. She drew a breath, her lips parting, and for the first time that evening, she spoke in English. Her voice was quiet but clear, each word resonant in the heavy air. "The deal is..." The simplicity of the words struck harder than any outburst. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the storm's rhythm against the window and the faint tremor of the chandelier's crystals. Ethan blinked, his mouth opening as though to argue, but no sound emerged. James sat frozen, his fists clenched, his face drained of color. The empire of arrogance they had built in this room collapsed in a single sentence. Lily's throat tightened, her eyes stinging. The weight of the moment pressed deep into her chest. The millionaire who had been dismissed as powerless had shattered her oppressors with 3 English words. It was more than business, it was reclamation. Hana leaned back slightly, her silence now triumphant. Rather than misunderstand, Kenji gathered the contract, closing it with deliberate precision, his composure unyielding. Lily stepped forward unconsciously, as though drawn closer to the gravity of Hana's authority. The storm outside softened, the rain easing into a steadier rhythm, as if even the city exhaled after the verdict. The chandelier glowed steadily, once more casting a quiet radiance across the table, where power had shifted irrevocably. James finally found his voice, though it was broken and trembling. You can't walk away from this. You'll lose your chance in the U.S. market. You'll regret this." His words rang hollow, desperation hollowing out every syllable. Hana's gaze did not waver. She spoke again in Japanese, and Lily's translation cut through his panic. "Regret belongs to those who underestimated. Power belongs to those who endure." The words settled like iron across the table. Ethan dropped his eyes, shame and fear twisting his features, while James sat in silence, his threats dissolving into nothing. Lily drew a breath, her heart swelling. She thought of her own life, the countless times she had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed as invisible. And now she had witnessed the cost of underestimating someone whose silence had hidden not weakness, but strength. When did someone's hidden strength surprise you? The question rose naturally in her mind, one she knew anyone who heard this story would carry with them. The orchids on the table swayed gently in the draft, their delicate petals glowing in the chandelier's light. The storm's echo hummed against the glass, no longer violent but insistent, a reminder of the power that had raged outside and within. Hana Miyamoto, the woman mocked for her silence, had spoken at last, and with those few English words, she had ended not just a deal but the illusion that arrogance could conquer dignity. James and Ethan sat defeated, their empire of deceit collapsed, their confidence scattered like ash. The opulent room, once their stage, now bore witness to their humiliation, and at the center of it all, Hana remained serene, her silence restored not as a burden but as triumph, her voice no longer trapped but sharpened into truth. The storm outside finally began to ease, rain slipping into a softer drizzle that traced shimmering rivers down the glass. Manhattan stretched beyond, blurred lights glowing faintly as if the city itself sighed in relief. After the night's battle, inside the dining room silence lingered, heavy but transformed. James and Ethan sat deflated, their arrogance stripped bare, their defeat etched across their pale faces. The contract lay closed, its traps exposed, its power dissolved. The chandelier glowed steady again, its fractured light illuminating the victors not of wealth, but of truth. Lily stood near the table, her chest still rising quickly, her heart echoing the storm's earlier rhythm. She had spoken what no one else dared, exposed what no one else could, and yet the weight of what she had done pressed against her ribs. She was a waitress in uniform, a student balancing tuition and rent, not someone who belonged at the center of billion-dollar battles. And now, as the executive's fury simmered beneath their silence, another fear crept into her thoughts, the wrath of her own manager. Her fear proved true when the dining room door opened and her supervisor stormed in. His face flushed, his voice low but sharp. "Lily," he hissed, eyes narrowing, "what do you think you're doing? This is not your place. You are here to serve, not to interfere. Do you understand what you've risked? Our reputation, our clients, your job." Lily lowered her eyes, her hands tightening at her sides. She wanted to speak, to explain that silence had been impossible, but her throat tightened with the weight of his anger. The humiliation burned hotter than the storm outside, threatening to undo the courage she had just found. Before she could answer, Kenji stepped forward, his calm composure cutting through the tension like a blade. He turned to the manager, his voice steady, deliberate, every word weighted with authority. "She did not interfere," he said. "She preserved dignity, she exposed deceit. Without her, this evening would have ended in theft, disguised as partnership. She acted not as a waitress but as a guardian of truth. And for that she will not be punished." The manager froze, stunned by the force of Kenji's defense. His eyes darted between Lily and Hana, the realization dawning that power in this room no longer belonged to the clients he thought he served, but to the woman they had underestimated. He swallowed hard, his anger dissolving into silence, then stepped back slowly, retreating toward the door. Lily's chest loosened, relief washing through her. She turned her eyes toward Kenji, gratitude shining in them, but he inclined his head slightly, as though acknowledging a duty fulfilled, rather than a favor given. Then Hana rose. The movement was graceful, deliberate, filled with authority that silenced every breath in the room. Her dark eyes softened as they met Lily's, gratitude shimmering where before there had been only steel. She spoke in Japanese, her voice calm but layered with emotion. Lily listened, her throat tightening as she translated aloud, though the words felt as much for her as for the others. "Miss Miyamoto says, tonight you gave me back more than a contract. You gave me back my voice. When others mocked, you stood. When deceit surrounded, you revealed the truth. I will not let your courage be forgotten." Lily's lips trembled as she spoke the words. Hana stepped closer, reached into her bag and placed a small card on the table before Lily. The embossed letters glowed faintly under the chandelier's light. Hana spoke again, her tone decisive. Lily translated softly, her voice breaking slightly. "She offers you a place within her foundation. She will fund your education, your art, your future. No longer will you serve in shadows. You will walk in light, supported by the strength you have already shown." The words struck Lily like a tide, overwhelming her with gratitude and disbelief. Her eyes stung as tears welled, her chest heaving with the sudden weight of possibility. She bowed deeply, her body trembling, her voice breaking as she whispered in Japanese directly to Hana, "Arigatou gozaimasu." Hana's hand reached gently to lift Lily's chin, her touch light but steady, a gesture both of respect and recognition. For a moment, the storm, the deceit, the arrogance, all of it melted into silence that carried only dignity. James pushed back his chair abruptly, fury flaring one last time. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice sharp, his mask shattered. "No one walks away from us, no one." But the words rang hollow, stripped of weight, powerless against the truth already revealed. Hana turned toward him slowly, her expression calm, unshaken. Her silence spoke louder than his threats, her triumph undeniable. Kenji gathered her belongings, Lily standing quietly at her side, and together they prepared to leave. The chandelier glowed above them, its fractured light now soft, almost reverent, as though acknowledging the shift of power that had unfolded beneath it. The door opened to the corridor, where the echoes of the storm hummed faintly. Hana paused before stepping through, turning once more to Lily. She spoke in English this time, her voice clear, deliberate, unshaken. "You are not invisible." The words pierced Lily's chest, shattering the last fragments of doubt within her. She felt seen, honored, lifted beyond the role she had thought defined her. She bowed deeply once more, her tears falling freely now, not of fear, but of relief. As Hana, Kenji, and Lily stepped into the hall, the storm outside softened further, rain becoming a gentle mist against the glass. Manhattan stretched beyond, glowing with blurred lights, a city alive with endless possibilities. Lily knew her life had changed in that room. She had entered as a silent observer, a shadow in uniform, and emerged as an ally, a protector of truth, a young woman whose courage had been recognized by a leader who herself had endured years of silence. The world would not remember the arrogance of James or Ethan, but it would remember the strength of Hana Miyamoto, and perhaps in time, the courage of the waitress who refused to let deceit win. And now the question remained, not just for those in that room, but for anyone who would hear this story. How many times have you underestimated someone, only to discover hidden strength too late? When did someone's hidden courage surprise you? Think about it now and let it stay with you. Share this story with someone who needs to see the power of hidden heroes. Subscribe for more tales that inspire, that remind us silence is not weakness, and that dignity, even in the darkest rooms, can shift the balance of power forever.